Okay, Paulette, take it away.
Great. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, thanks for that introduction, Beth. And I just want to say a really sincere thank you to the Montana Native Plant Society for supporting that bird-friendly demonstration garden that Sacajawea Audubon put in. Your grant was timely and gave us just the right boost when we needed it. So it was greatly, greatly appreciated. So I'm excited to be here with you tonight, and I get to talk about my favorite topic, which is landscaping for birds. And it's great to be with a group of plant enthusiasts like yourself that already have an interest in native plants, because gardening and native plants and our love of nature and our enjoyment of birds, they all go hand in hand. And I'm assuming that you're all joining us tonight because you have an appreciation for birds also, as well as plants. Oh, let me see. I forgot to share my screen. Here we go. Let's get that up. There we go. So here are just a few of the birds of Montana that we can attract to our gardens. Birds come in so many different wonderful colors, and they have just seemingly infinite variety of sizes, shapes, and personalities too. And it's kind of amazing because the birds in Montana are so colorful, they practically rival the ones that you would see if you go down to Costa Rica. If you look up here in the corner here, we've got a Western tanager, and friends of mine like to call him the cover boy because he used to be pictured on the cover of the early versions of the Peterson Field Guide to the Birds of the West, and certainly a handsome bird for that. This little raspberry colored house finch comes into our feeders very readily. He's got a beautiful warbling song. And wow, the brilliant blue turquoise on this lazuli bunting is kind of breathtaking for us all. We've got northern flickers here, a red-breasted nuthatch. Of course, we're all waiting for the robins to come back and announce that it's spring in Montana. Here's our most common hummingbird in Montana, and these come into gardens quite readily. These are calliope hummingbirds. They've got these beautiful gorget feathers on their throat, very unique feathers. They can actually splay them out and raise them up in a way that puts them on display for the females. And beautiful little yellow tannet, or yellow warblers, I'm sorry, up in shrubs. We always love to see those. And here's a cheery chickadee that everybody seems to love. So we can't help but feel a lot of joy and delight when we get to see birds like this up close and personal in our yards. And that alone gives us a real incentive to want to bring birds into our yards. But there's another consideration too, and that is that bird populations are absolutely struggling. And most of that is due to habitat loss. The knowledge that North American birds have lost 3 billion birds in their population over the last 50 years. That's fully 1/3 of their population has been reduced, and quite utterly depressing, but it's the one thing that we can do something about. Gallatin County and Bozeman, oh boy, they are certainly no exception when it comes to habitat loss. Bozeman's population has doubled in the last 30 years, and Gallatin County is the fastest growing county in Montana and equals a lot of habitat loss. But no matter where you are in the state, just every house built, every new commercial area developed, and every parking lot paved over means we're losing natural habitat. And I better explain that I live in Bozeman, so most of my plant recommendations tend to come from my knowledge of plants in the southwest and south central part of the state. But I think that you're going to find that most of the plants that I recommend are hardy throughout the state, and the design concepts certainly that I'll be discussing are applicable anywhere. It's always good though to go to your local nursery or your local garden center to determine if a plant is actually hardy for your area. So how are we going to combat some of this habitat loss? Well, if songbird populations are going to recover or at least stabilize, they're going to need some help. And we certainly need our spaces for homes, businesses, and yeah, even parking lots. But let's consider where we can individually make a difference in our own yards like this, in our own landscapes, and we can recover some of that lost habitat. And of course, lawns in particular, we need to reduce the lawns. Mowed lawns have now become the largest irrigated crop, so to speak, in the United States. And if you put them all together, they actually cover an area the size of Texas. Our obsession, and I do believe it is an obsession with mowed lawns, started back in the time of Thomas Jefferson, as he and the other prominent figures of his time emulated the rich Europeans by creating massive expanses of lawn with a variety of exotic trees and shrubs showcased. Think about the Monticello Gardens. So they kind of set the standard, and lawns became really a status symbol in the United States, and no one wanted to be without one. Unfortunately, there's not a single species of bird that can live its life cycle in a mowed lawn. Sure, some robins and magpies will go out for hunting for worms in your yard, and that's always good to have a little bit of lawn, but basically a lawn is a non-functioning ecosystem. It's an impoverished ecosystem. So let's just note here that it would be nice to think we could actually recreate exactly the habitat that we've destroyed, but it doesn't really work that way. In a grassland prairie, if prairie and open space like this gets developed, say for a small lot subdivision near a town, it just doesn't matter how many native grasses and wildflowers that we plant. We really can't bring the birds back to our yards. We can't bring back a red-tailed hawk, a western meadowlark, a horned lark. All of those birds really need the open spaces. So instead, we'll focus on the birds that might be on the fringe edges of the grassland, where there's trees and shrubs. A lot of birds are much more adaptable that live on edges of habitat. So in general, it seems that the best plants to support bird life in Montana's urban and suburban communities come from our foothill and riparian habitats. So trees like aspens and willows, chokecherries, dogwoods, golden currants, elderberries, Rocky Mountain juniper, some of the conifers. If we bring those kinds of plants to our yard, they're surprising how many bird species that typically use those habitats. They're fairly adaptable birds. And if you have them planted densely enough in a suburban area, these birds will actually come in and adapt and actually thrive in our communities. Right here, we've got a lovely little downy woodpecker. They're gonna like aspen trees especially. This is one of our more handsome sparrows. It's a chipping sparrow with his little red topknot. They especially love Rocky Mountain junipers to nest in and provide good cover for them. This western tanager comes down into our communities, especially during the spring and fall. In the middle of summer, they often go up into the mountains to nest, but we will get to see them around our yards too. And of course, everybody loves the chickadee, and they are extremely adaptable. So we're going to want to turn to our landscaping to create some habitat, but let's avoid this problem. Here we have a very attractive landscape, and you can tell it's been professionally designed. Look at that variety of colors, forms, textures, really been thought out well. It's neat, it's simple, and it's quite lifeless though. There's a lot of lawn, there's a few alien plants that are kind of pruned into submission, and no bird is going to come into this habitat, and matter of fact, no other wildlife will really either. So the other option is to go all out. Check out this yard. It's just an absolute rich and beautiful oasis of habitat for birds, pollinators, other wildlife to enjoy. And of course, we're going to love living in this also. Now, you probably can't do this and commit your whole yard to a natural habitat like this, but even just doing so in one corner of your yard, just taking the back lot line and putting in a bio hedge of some kind of density of shrubs and flowers like this, every bit that you do adds to the overall fabric of habitat throughout our communities. Right here, you're seeing a bunch of lovely goldenrod. We've got fleabane in here and wild bergamot, trees, shrubs, vines in the background. And this beautiful garden happens to be in Missoula. Here's a garden that's just getting going in Bozeman. It's only 2 years old, but what a great and unique way to have a front yard garden. It's full of pollinators every summer already. Hummingbirds are coming in to feed on the columbine, and the perennials put out a lot of seeds for finches and sparrows. There's a lot of things we can do with our yards rather than put in lawns. So as you design your landscape, remember birds need 4 basic features to live and thrive. First of all is food, and depending upon the species of bird, they might be looking for berries or nectar or seeds or insects. And we're going to talk about those in a lot more in detail shortly, but enjoy for a moment just this gray catbird who's eating a service berry here. Equally important is cover, and birds need places to hide from predators. They need places to seek shelter in bad weather, and that's going to mean some density to our plantings. We've got to furnish some serious shelter and security for the birds to keep them safe. Of course, most of us don't have a creek or a pond in our yard. So the next best way to add water to our yard is a bird bath. And here we've got a white-crowned sparrow thoroughly enjoying a summertime bath. In the winter, you can actually put out a heated bird bath. They're now available, and that makes a nice treat for the birds. Birds also need nesting sites, and that's going to need some more maturity to the landscape. We need more mature trees with strong branches to support nests, or dense habitat of thickets of shrubbery. But you need more mature plants, so best get planting now so we can get those trees up there bigger and so the birds can use them soon. I will say that you can add, you can supplement nesting sites in your yard for just a few species of birds. Chickadees and wrens in particular are attracted to birdhouses, and if your habitat's right, so will tree swallows or bluebirds. So one of the quickest ways to get birds into your yard is to provide lots of berries and fruit. And here, there's a young cedar waxwing. He is literally bending over backwards to grab a chokecherry. In Montana, we are blessed with a great number of natives that produce really desirable berries, service berries, chokecherries, dogwoods, golden currants, elderberries. We've just got a lot of great shrubs in Montana that provide good food for birds this way. And by the way, I just have to mention that this photo is by one of the Native Montana Plant Society members. Dan Ellison of Helena took this photo, and he won an award with the National Audubon Society for it. Great photo. So some species of birds aren't interested in fruit. There are seed specialists like finches and sparrows, and even this nuthatch here. We've got a pine siskin down here eating seeds on a cutleaf coneflower. This goldfinch, American goldfinch, is waiting for these purple cone flowers to ripen their seeds. And almost everybody's got room in their yard for a few annual sunflowers, and the birds will all thank you for that if you put them in. Of course, some birds need nectars, in particular hummingbirds, and this is a lovely rufous hummingbird coming into a milkweed flower. And it turns out that milkweed flowers are really valuable for a lot more than just monarch butterflies. They're good for numerous pollinators. And it's a good idea just in your yard to have a real variety a real diversity of plants to attract a variety of birds. But most importantly, and I need to stress this really, most importantly, birds need insects. We don't think about that always, but nearly all songbirds, 96% of North American songbirds, raise their young on a diet of insects and arthropods. And caterpillars are the preferred food. Even birds like this chickadee that love to eat seeds at our feeders all through the winter. During the breeding season, it's insects that they need, and caterpillars in particular. So on the East Coast, some patient researchers, you can hardly believe this, but they sat and watched what a pair of Carolina chickadees brought into their nest. And they were bringing in 390 to 570 caterpillars per day to feed their young. That means it took over 9,000 caterpillars until those young birds were completely fledged and out on their own. I don't even think we have that many caterpillars in Montana in a given yard anywhere, but maybe I'm wrong. And certainly other insects must be making up the difference if we don't have them here. It's obvious though, if we're going to have birds in your yard, we need to embrace insects in our yards also. And that means planting native plants that will attract those insects. It also means skipping the use of pesticides. Pesticides are killing insects. If we have no insects, we have no birds. So let's focus on native plants in particular. Native plants are really the key to success in creating habitat for birds. And luckily, native plants are easy for us to grow. They're hardy to our climate already. They are fairly drought tolerant. They require less water, less maintenance, and they're more attractive to birds. Birds and insects that they need for food have actually co-evolved over time with plants, with our native plants, that is. And birds have search engines in their little brains and that are pre-programmed to seek out the native plants. And it's the same for insects also. The bottom line is it's native plants that birds and insects are the very most drawn to. And many plants offered for sale at nurseries are exotic ornamentals from other countries. And their leaves can actually be unpalatable to local insects. So by contrast here, you see some really nice native plants. This particular garden is in the front corner of a yard. It's just a nice little island bed. And we've got a canopy story of aspen trees and a Doug fir in the back. Layered underneath that are red-twigged dogwoods and Great Basin wild rye. There's a variety of wildflowers mixed along the edge of the bed over here. We also have mountain ash, great native plant for Montana, produces wonderful fruit for birds. And down here you can see some gaillardia or blanket flower. And in the back we've got monarda and fleabane, just a variety of wonderful native plants that create rich habitat for birds. So plant choice really matters. And I'm hoping that most of you got the pleasure of watching Douglas Ptolemy in December give the presentation for the Montana Native Plant Society. Ptolemy and his research assistants worked back on the mid-Atlantic states where they have lots of oak trees. And he found that 557 caterpillars are found on various oak species back in the Midwest or the mid-Atlantic states. In contrast, ginkgo, a total exotic, only would have 5 species of caterpillars found on it by researchers. So yes, oaks are a wonderful plant for us to use. Unfortunately, Montana only has the bur oak, and it only occurs in the southeast corner of the state. Hopefully, if we replant that tree in other parts of the state, it will bring some of its benefits and its insects along with it. But I did look, and the National Wildlife Federation, in consultation with Doug Ptolemy, they present some of the best native trees in Montana to support butterfly and moth caterpillars are typically the aspens and cottonwoods, anything in the poplar family, willows, chokecherries, birch, oak, pines, spruce, fir, and any of the large berry producing shrubs. All are very good at supporting butterflies and moth caterpillars. Again, let's just reiterate how important plant choice really matters. These are so appealing to look at. They really make a wonderful design statement. These are the Carl Forster feather reedgrass. Excellent landscape design plant, but it's useless for birds because it is self-sterile. It produces absolutely no seeds for wildlife. Birds do not use these for cover. So yes, maybe you want to use a few of these plants for dramatic statements in a landscape, but also consider such accents as Indian rice grass or little blue stem or prairie June grass, or just go through the list of native grasses that might also work around here. To create bird-friendly landscapes, it's really important to create habitat layers. Having just a few specimen trees in a mowed lawn, even if they are natives, it just doesn't offer much in the way of true habitat. The greatest value comes in having clusters of plants consisting of trees and shrubs and ground covers all planted fairly close together. We're trying to create and replicate the woodland effect. And here you can see a fine example of a layered landscape. In Montana, the canopy of trees might be birch or aspen, or maybe pine trees. You could use understory plants like Rocky Mountain maple, American plum, and any of our larger berry producing shrubs. But along the edges of the planting, you could then put in, where you've got more sunshine, you could put in a variety of native perennials and ground covers, and be thinking about which ones will attract pollinators, provide seeds, or offer hummingbirds some nectar. Now, I like to have some kind of a natural bark mulch on my gardens to control the weeds. And I've got to tell you, I prefer bark dust, otherwise called soil pep. And that's just ground up bark that makes a nice fine mulch. Eventually, it actually composts into the soil. And so therefore, we're getting some of the decomposers in the soil at the same time. Birds will scratch around in there and find them too. So here are some good examples of layered landscapes in place. On the left, you see an overstory of aspens and some conifers too in this tree. There's actually a pine in the back and a blue spruce here. Underneath, we've got red twig dogwoods. They're a bit chewed by the deer, unfortunately. And a cotoneaster, and there's just a variety of flowers and perennials underneath them. And over here, again, we're back to the home in Missoula, where there is very little grass, a big, large yard filled with wildflowers and natives. And they're surrounded by vines, trees, shrubs, excellent, excellent habitat layers for the birds. Okay, so you may have noticed I'm not just mentioning native plants, like this cotoneaster down here is not native. The vine, the grapevine on the arbor is certainly not native. However, they are excellent plants for attracting birds. And I want you to remember that even when Douglas Ptolemy was speaking, they had done some research on the chickadees back in again, along the mid-Atlantic states. And they found that as long as there were, 70 to 75% native plants in a yard, it was very supportive of native birds, and they were successful in raising young. If it got less than that, if the exotic plants, the ornamental plants, took up more than that 70% of land in the habitat around a home, then the birds were not either nesting there or they were having much less success in raising their young. So the most important thing to remember, though, when you're planting non-natives is to be sure they're not invasive in your I can't talk, in your area. The Montana Native Plant Society and the Montana Nursery and Landscape Association have created a horticultural guideline to consider when you're selecting your plants. And a link to those guidelines can be found at the Native Plant website, Native Plant Society website. And I believe they're going to put a link to that horticultural guideline also in your chat box. So look for it there, click on it, and just keep that on your computer also. So besides habitat layers, we want to think about planting densely for the birds. Large, densely planted groupings are far, far more desirable than scattered individual plants. Birds like clusters of plants. They like to have the branches actually intertwining and touching together. So it's okay to plant your plants a little more crowded than what is typically recommended by nurseries and garden centers. So here, this is just a very small corner of a yard, but it's been turned into a grove of aspens underneath. We've got some dogwoods and lilacs growing, and a whole variety of perennial ground covers and flowers underneath that. Very, very effective. And it's birds like this black-headed grosbeak and this yellow warbler. They will not come into a yard unless you have a fair amount of density like this, and you get enough plants together and they may even nest in your yard. So have you been noticing how narrow that city lots have become on their side yards? Some places only require a 5-yard setback, or 5-foot setback, I'm sorry. And they're not really big enough for a play space for kids or an outdoor seating area. So why not put them to good use for birds? This homeowner has put in a densely planted bed. It's really only 5 to 7 feet wide, and they've created just a wonderful corridor of habitat for the birds. They've also effectively screened out the next door neighbor house. This works really well on a side yard, and it works just as well on a back lot line where you might want to screen the neighbors behind you. In this case, they've used a lot of aspen trees tucked in, scattered around. There's some nice Canada red cherries. Underneath are red twig dogwoods, some spireas, and Colorado blue spruce is coming along out next to it. Here's a much more manicured yard, but we can see how effective just a 5-foot wide bed along the driveway has been turned into a privacy screen. And it's beautiful and it's bird friendly because they use dogwoods, red twig dogwoods or red osier dogwoods. They offer this beautiful seasonal color. There's white berries that are attracting birds in the fall. Right along the front edge, they added a variety of perennials. There's some catmint in here and some grasses, some native grasses that put some seeds down for birds. The catmint is excellent for bringing in butterflies, hummingbirds. Lots of bees love them, but I gotta warn you, catmint is not native and it can be invasive. If you do want to plant catmint in your yard, you might want to look for the Walker's Low, which is more of a sterile plant and it doesn't seed readily. It'll still bring in pollinators, but it won't go crazy and move all over the neighborhood. Or just skip the catmints altogether and add other natives like gaillardia and dotted gay feather and showy goldeneye would make an excellent front edge also. Here we've got another friendly bio hedge being installed to help screen out the new house being constructed right next door. This homeowner used Rocky Mountain juniper, elderberry, serviceberry, lilac, and black chokecherry. Chokeberry, I'm sorry, to use for cover for the birds and to provide berries for them. On the front edge of the garden are going to go in bee balm, penstemon, and columbine, which all are hummingbird attractants. Now the lilac and the black chokeberry are not natives, but they're certainly quality plants to attract the birds. And as you can see, the next year, we've got the plants are filling in nicely, the flowers are starting to bloom, and a robin has given it the okay. He's in there already eating the black chokecherry berries. Here's an alternative to a front yard. No mowing needed here on a typical basis. Forget the mowing, welcome the pollinators. Here, the front yard is planted entirely with native plants. Oops, wrong one. It's been planted with native grasses, I'm sorry, and prairie coneflower, blanket flower. There's blue flax for earlier season blooms. And this creates a whole haven for butterflies and pollinators. Birds will come in because they're attracted to the insects. They'll also feed on the wildflower seeds. Now, ideally, there should be some shrubs and trees nearby too for cover for the birds. And I have to point out, you might think this is a no maintenance lawn, but that's not exactly true. You have to be really diligent in keeping out invasive weeds especially during the first years of getting it established. And a lawn like this needs to be cut down and mowed once a year, either in the late fall or early spring. You can just take all that vegetation and compost it somewhere, but you have to get it raked off and available for next year's new season growth to come in. So here's another alternative to a grassy lawn. This is the lawn of one of our Native Plant Society members here in Bozeman. And this beautiful front yard is planted entirely with native plants, most of them extremely drought tolerant. Even though the bed along the sidewalk here gets hot sun all day long, it faces south by using really thick mulch. I think it's like 4 to 6 inches thick. It's really thick. And planting all drought tolerant natives, there is very little supplemental water needed here. You can see we've got blanket flower or gaillardia. We've got a lot of blue flax coming in. We've got pussy toes that are so drought tolerant. We've got firecracker penstemon. There's some blue penstemons in here too. And this one is one of my favorites, the alum root. All very, very drought tolerant. Check out this little backyard. It's hard to believe that just 2 years ago, this was a bluegrass lawn with sprinklers on it. And with permission from the condo association, the homeowners got permission, went in, removed all the sod, planted this garden. It's only 2 years old. And the plants that they chose in this case were all bird friendly or pollinator friendly, and they were all water wise. So they're all on a drip irrigation system. You'll see they're not all natives. We got California poppies in here, and we've got some cultivars of other natives, but it's just an excellent, beautiful garden. And she does have some nice shrubs in the background that are going to be coming up. She's got some service berries, red twig dogwood, and a small maple coming in. So as those start growing up, she's going to get more and more birds. Now I want to take a look at what I like to call the all-star plants for attracting birds. At the top of the list has to be serviceberry. Its blooms are absolutely stunning in the springtime. And when the berries come ripe, that would be midsummer, and usually around July, everything comes into these berries. You can see tanagers, grosbeaks, cedar waxwings, thrushes, flickers, finches, even grouse, and chickadees, of course. Just the list goes on and on. Serviceberry are an all-time favorite for birds. If you have a large yard, you can plant the native Saskatoon serviceberry, but it will grow up to 20 feet tall, so give it some space, give it some room to grow. If you have a more smaller yard in town, you might need a more compact plant. There are some excellent cultivars at the nurseries. You can look for the Regent cultivar. That one remains only 5 to 6 feet tall. Really beautiful, tidy plant. And then there's red osier dogwood. A large variety of birds absolutely love these berries in the fall too. Let's see here. They, of course, are a gorgeous plant due to the attractive red stems. The berries are white rather than dark, and very unusual. But tanagers, vireos, thrushes, and even woodpeckers will come into these. A friend of mine has seen a pileated woodpecker eating these berries off of red twig dogwoods. It'd be a sight to see. And everyone's familiar with chokecherries, of course. They produce those prolific berry crops, and birds, again, just a whole variety of birds really love chokecherries. It also happens to be one of the best shrubs we have in Montana to support moth and butterfly larvae. And these lovely flowers come out in the spring. Those get lots of pollinators on them also. So chokecherries can grow quite tall. They can get up 20 feet tall, and they sucker quite naturally. It'll form a thicket, which is excellent for birds because the birds love the cover that a nice thicket of chokecherries will provide. But keeping that in mind, make sure you've got a space big enough for chokecherries. Plant them on the back edge of a property line where they can spread out, or if you need to keep them tidier in a smaller garden, just put an edge around them. Put it one of the typical landscaping edges around them to keep them from suckering all through your garden. So I just want to go back and say that these three shrubs, serviceberry, red osier dogwood, and chokecherry, they are really the top three native shrubs for birds. There's a lot of other great plants in Montana: elderberry, golden currant, American cranberry, cranberry bush. They're all worthy runners up. But those three top plants provide the best habitat and the best food stores, and they're a bit staggered out. They don't all come ripe at the exact same time. So excellent plants for your garden. So let's next look at some trees. And of course, we know and we love aspens for its aesthetic attributes. The attractive whitish bark. We've got the little shiny green leaves that just shiver in the slightest breeze, and we love its brilliant fall golden foliage. But the other thing about aspens is they get an absolute A+ for wildlife value. Some people might not be fond of aspen because they tend to attract insects. Well, that's great because birds need insects. Aspens are a host for a lot of insects and caterpillars, and insectivorous birds will love them. You may have noticed that in Montana, aspens in particular were attacked by a little breakout of leaf miners last year. And birds were taking advantage of that extra food source. They would peck at the leaf, right where the leaf miner was at. They would grab that leaf miner out of there and find the extra food that way. Other attributes: aspens have fruiting catkins that produces tiny seeds, and the finches and other birds that love tiny seeds like that, they'll come and eat those off your aspens. The big mature aspens are going to provide nesting sites for birds, whether it's on the branches, the forked branches, or woodpeckers love the softness of the aspen. They will pound holes like a downy woodpecker. He'll peck out a nesting cavity in an aspen tree. Whether he uses it that next year or not, maybe a chickadee will come in and use it instead. So aspens are great for woodpeckers in that way too. For a shade tree, you just can't go wrong with a paper birch. They're so handsome. They're native to some parts of Montana, not everywhere, but they're quite hardy, and they grow well as long as they get some supplemental water. These are the catkins here, and that's the reproductive part of the plant. And they're filled with tiny seeds. I've looked for them, and they're so small, you'd just be amazed. But goldfinches, siskins, and redpolls kind of go crazy for the catkins seeds on birch trees like this. When my birch trees have catkins on them like this, my birds are actually not going to the feeders, they're going to the birch trees instead to feed. Birch trees are also a bit like aspens in that they tend to attract quite a few insects. They're hosts to lots of moths especially. And because of that, chickadees, warblers, and even tiny kinglets will come and glean all over the trees looking for insects and the larvae that are hidden on the tree. I think most everybody knows mountain ash, and they're recognized for their showy white flowers in the spring and their bright orange-red berries in the fall. And because those berries are persistent on trees all winter long, you'll probably still see them on trees even now in March here in Montana. They provide a great food source when birds need it most. Right now, as robins are coming back to Montana. If they're not able to find insects and worms, they can always go to a mountain ash tree and find some food. Waxwings in the middle of winter, Bohemian waxwings, like this one we see above us here, will flock to mountain ash trees. And you might have a whole flock of 50 cedar or mountain ash, I'm sorry, 50 Bohemian waxwings coming into a mountain ash tree like this all at once, and they will practically strip a tree of their berries. Oh, and I gotta say, I didn't put in a slide of flowering crabapple trees because they're not native, but they have to say they're an excellent plant also for providing a persistent winter food source for birds. Same thing, they stay on the tree all through the winter. And though the flowering crabs that we typically get from nurseries are cultivars from Asia, there are actually 4 native species of crabapple in the United States. We mostly don't know about those. And those plants seem to be similar enough in makeup, the natives and the ornamentals, that the insects don't seem to detect the difference. So that makes crabapples actually a valuable host for insects and caterpillars across our state. It actually supports ecosystem functions, even though it is an ornamental exotic from another country. So let's not forget about evergreens. As we've discussed, birds need cover and they need nesting sites. And that's what the conifers like pines, spruce, and junipers are really good at providing. Imagine yourself, you're just a little songbird out there in the middle of the winter in Montana. Here comes a big blizzard. What are you going to do? You're not going to go sit on an aspen branch out in the middle of the blizzard. You're too exposed. What you need to find, you want to get the refuge deep inside of the protective branches of some kind of a conifer. And so plants like these Colorado spruce, even Austrian pine, ponderosa pine is our native, Rocky Mountain junipers, oh, they provide excellent cover for birds, especially if you can not just put them singly out in a yard by themselves, but plant them in little clusters of 3 or 4 or 5 little lines of them or clusters of them. That's what really creates some good refuge for the birds. Plus, conifers can provide a lot of food for birds, such as pine cones with seeds inside. Certain species of birds like crossbills and grosbeaks are looking for pine cone seeds. Rocky Mountain juniper berries, they're so hard you wouldn't think anything would eat them, but Townsend's solitaires and robins actually love Rocky Mountain juniper berries. And sometimes you actually see robins surviving through the winter in Montana. They don't go south if you choose to stay here. And typically what they are living on is Rocky Mountain juniper berries. Oh, and I definitely recommend Douglas fir too. It's a great plant, but it's unfortunately not very available in the nursery industry. They're harder to grow, they're harder to transplant. And for some reason, the nursery industry really focuses on plants like this Colorado blue spruce or some of the other spruce types. If you can find them, plant them. And who doesn't hope to entice hummingbirds to your yard? Well, it's mostly flowers that you can plant to bring in hummingbirds. This right here is the wild bergamot or bee balm. They're native all over Montana, especially in foothill habitats. Excellent plant for hummingbirds and very, very drought tolerant. Now, there are a lot of cultivars that are available in nurseries that are called Monarda or bee balm also. And they come in gorgeous colors like red, coral, pink, all kinds of different shades. I have to warn you though, they are not drought tolerant. They're going to need quite a bit of extra water. Here we've got a little ruby-throated hummingbird coming into it. We don't have ruby-throated hummingbirds in Montana, but we do have calliope hummingbirds and rufous hummingbirds. And those are the hummingbirds you're most hoping to find here. Here we have Dropmore honeysuckle, a very attractive vine with its orange, red, trumpet-shaped flowers. It's not native, but it's a really well-behaved vine. It's an absolute hummingbird magnet. If you're trying to attract hummingbirds, it's a good one. Here's a great native that I absolutely love, and that is golden currant. And it's at least in the Gallatin Valley, this is the first native shrub to start blooming. It blooms so early, it's in May. Most of our wildflowers aren't even blooming yet when this gets started. And what's interesting is our hummingbirds come back to Montana in May also. And it's a perfect match for them. I've actually seen calliope hummingbirds sitting on the tops of golden currants, guarding them from other intruders. Hummingbirds will also seek out penstemons, like this firecracker red penstemon. They love the color red, by the way. They love dotted gay feather. Columbine's another one. Actually, the trick with hummingbirds is just to have a wide variety of flowers with staggered blooms all through the season, and that keeps your hummingbirds around. You don't need anything blooming really in September, October, because about the 1st of September, hummingbirds pack their bags and head down south again. Here are just some of our native perennials that will attract seed-eating birds, like pine siskins or finches, like goldfinches, like this beautiful bright one down here, and several sparrow species. We've got blanket flower or gaillardia. We've got goldenrod, excellent plant, dotted gay feather, prairie coneflower, the purple coneflower, and this was a new one for me, showy goldeneye. It's an excellent native to Montana, and mine just got big enough this past year to really produce a lot of seeds. And my siskins and my goldfinches just went crazy for them. They were trying to get to the seeds, but the stems on these plants are so flimsy that they don't really support the weight of a bird very well. So the birds ended up doing all kinds of acrobatic tricks. They were hanging upside down. They were trying to grab those seeds, and it was quite a fun show to watch. So for people that just don't have very much space to work with, you can always consider sunflowers. They're not native, but they're the common garden variety of sunflower is just an excellent plant. If you've got a vegetable garden, just planting one corner of your vegetable garden up with a few sunflowers, they'll bring in the chickadees, the nuthatches, like this is a white-breasted nuthatch here. They'll bring sparrows, finches, and even towhees will come to feed on the ground underneath a sunflower like this. There are numerous native sunflowers too, with much smaller seeds, of course. This one happens to be Maximilian sunflower. I've been told that it's quite an aggressive plant though. It will spread by rhizomes, probably by seeds also. And you might want to keep an edge around this flower or put it in a back corner where it's got some room to grow. We can always supplement our garden habitats, sometimes especially because it really hasn't filled out enough yet. You can put up feeders like the suet feeder or sunflower seeds, peanut feeders, hummingbird feeders, you name it. We can put up nest boxes for wrens like this little house wren right here. Chickadees like supplemental nest boxes of this sort. If you're in the right habitat, you can use nest boxes to attract tree swallows and bluebirds to your property. Do be careful and do some research online. Make sure you get nest boxes with the right size holes to attract the kinds of birds that you're looking for. And of course, putting out water for birds is just great. And this shows you that you don't always have to have your bird bath up on a pedestal. These gray partridge were really happy to find a bird bath down on the ground, and they were coming into my friend's yard every day to get a drink. You don't want to do this if there's cats in the neighborhood that might catch the birds down on the ground. Then it's better to get it up off the ground and up on a pedestal. So let's just reiterate here the keys to success. Be sure your yard includes a healthy dose of native plants to attract birds and to attract the insects that they're going to rely on. create habitat layers like these, where you've got canopy trees of varying heights. Make sure there's some heavy shrub layers and some density there. Make sure you have ground covers and perennials included in your habitat layers. Plant a variety of plants and you'll get more of a variety of birds. And plant them densely. The denser you can, the more thick patches of habitat you can create, the more birds you're going to have in your yard. And I just want to say that if you're listening to this tonight, even very small spaces can contribute to bird habitat. You can still add pots of bird-friendly plants on a patio. You can create a little miniature habitat. And every little bit helps to bring our communities more close to the biodiversity that we deserve to have with pollinators and bees and birds and maybe some chipmunks around. So with that, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you tonight. I love talking with people who care about plants because, you know, we have the power as gardeners to make a difference and create healthy, functioning habitats right in our own gardens or out in our parks or anywhere in our communities. I've got some, for more information places, I hope that Beth or Gretchen has put in your chat box some links for a brochure that Sacajawea Audubon has created. It's called Landscaping for Birds in Southwest Montana. I think you'll find it useful for the rest of Montana for the most part also. There's also the horticultural guidelines for Montana. And you can go to www.sacajaweaaudubon.org. And that's our website. And you will find there plant profiles of a lot of these species that we've been talking about tonight. You'll find a link to the Landscaping for Birds in Southwest Montana brochure that you can download and keep for yourself. And I've got my email up here too. If you're interested, you can contact me with specific questions. But I'm happy to stick around tonight and answer questions for a while. And I just want to thank you for coming and wish you really good luck on your landscaping for birds. Thank you.